Airports always seemed like chaotic hubs of missed connections, endless waiting, and moments that could alter your life in a split second. It wasn't a day for cliches, but as fate would have it, my life changed right there in the middle of Terminal C. I was rushing, not because I was late, but because I couldn't bear the suffocating tension of my own thoughts. My flight was still an hour away, but the familiar weight of my overpacked carry-on was a reminder of the life I was leaving behind, a life of disappointments and broken promises. The carousel beeped, and the conveyor belt rattled to life. One by one, bags began their slow march, teasing passengers who leaned in to snatch their belongings. My eyes darted to the familiar black suitcase with the red tag. There it was. Relief swept through me as I grabbed it, yanking it off the belt. "Excuse me, that's mine," a sharp voice called out, cutting through the airport hum. I turned around, startled. A man stood a few feet away, his brows furrowed in annoyance. His sharp gray eyes locked onto me with the intensity of a hawk zeroing in on its prey. He was tall, well-dressed, and had an air about him that screamed authority or arrogance. I couldn't decide which. "No, it's not," I retorted, defensive. I hadn't even opened it, but I was sure it was mine. The red tag was distinct, wasn't it? "I'm pretty sure it is," he said, stepping closer. His deep voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "You might want to double-check before you take off with someone else's belongings." I rolled my eyes but glanced at the tag anyway. My heart sank. It wasn't mine. The realization hit me like a cold slap, but I wasn't about to back down so easily. "Look, it's an honest mistake," I said, handing the suitcase over. "No harm done." He arched a brow, his lips twitching as if suppressing a smirk. "Honest mistake? Do you always grab random luggage and claim it as your own?" I bristled at his tone. "It's an easy mix-up. No need to be dramatic about it." "Dramatic?" He laughed, a low, rich sound that only annoyed me further. "You almost walked away with my luggage. Do you even know what's in here?" I crossed my arms, glaring at him. "I don't know. Your fancy suits and overpriced cologne? Relax, no one's interested in stealing your stuff." His smirk vanished, replaced by a steely expression. "I wouldn't be so sure about that." I frowned, caught off guard by the sudden shift in his tone. Before I could reply, he unzipped the suitcase slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse. What I saw left me speechless. Stacks of cash. Bundles of it. Crisp, clean bills arranged neatly inside. "What the?" I stammered, stepping back. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "Still think it's just overpriced cologne?" My mind raced as I stared at the open suitcase. Who was this guy? And why was he carrying so much cash? My stomach churned with unease. This was no ordinary situation, and I just walked right into it. "Care to explain why you're hauling around a bank vault?" I asked, my voice dripping with skepticism. He zipped the suitcase shut, his movements calm and deliberate. "That's none of your business." "You're right, it's not. But you made it mine when you accused me of theft in the middle of an airport." I shot back. His eyes narrowed, studying me as if he were trying to decide whether I was a threat or just an annoyance. "You've got a sharp tongue for someone who's clearly out of their depth." I bristled at his condescending tone. "And you got a lot of nerve for someone carrying enough cash to buy this entire terminal." He didn't answer, his jaw tightening as he glanced around. It was then I noticed the subtle tension in his posture, the way his eyes darted to the exits and the nearby security guards. He was on edge, and now I was too. "Are you in trouble?" I asked, lowering my voice. "Because if you are, I don't want any part of it." "Relax," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Everything's under control." "Yeah, sure," I muttered. "Because walking around with that much cash screams under control." He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Look, you've seen too much already. Just forget this ever happened, and we'll both go our separate ways." "Forget this?" I scoffed. "You think I'm going to walk away after what I just saw?" "No chance." His lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't have a choice?" "Oh, I always have a choice," I snapped. "And right now, I'm choosing to get some answers." He stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his jaw tightening. The tension between us was thick, almost palpable. I didn't know who he was, what he was hiding, or why he was carrying so much cash. But one thing was clear, I wasn't backing down. "You're persistent," he said finally, his voice low. "That's either going to get you answers or get you into trouble." Or both, I shot back, folding my arms. So, are you going to explain? Or do I have to call security? His eyes flashed, and for a split second, I thought he might grab the suitcase and run. Instead, he sighed, glancing around again as if calculating his next move. Fine, he said. You want answers? Let's go somewhere less public. Yeah, because following a stranger with a suitcase full of cash doesn't sound sketchy at all, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. You wanted answers, didn't you? He countered. You're not going to get them standing here. I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to walk away. But curiosity gnawed at me, louder than the warning bells in my head. Against my better judgment, I nodded. All right, I said. Lead the way. He didn't wait for me to change my mind. He turned and walked briskly toward the nearest exit, his suitcase rolling behind him. I followed, my heart pounding. Every step felt like a gamble, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the brink of something big, something life-changing. We ended up in a secluded corner of the airport parking lot, far from the crowds and the cameras. The air was thick with tension as he stopped and turned to face me. All right, he said, his voice steady. Here's the deal. My name is Ryan. And no, I'm not some criminal or drug dealer, in case that's what you're thinking. Then what are you? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Because normal people don't walk around with that much cash. He hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. I'm a businessman, he said finally. Let's just say I deal in high-stakes investments. That's vague, I said. Try again. He gave me a hard look. It's all you're getting for now. I rolled my eyes. Fine. But if you're legit, why all the secrecy? Why not just transfer the money like a normal person? Because some things can't go through banks, he said, his tone clipped. And because people like me don't get to live normal lives. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I wanted to press him for more, but the guarded look in his eyes told me I'd hit a wall. Okay, I said slowly. So, what now? You've got your suitcase. I've got questions. Where does this end? That depends, he said, his gaze locking onto mine. Are you going to walk away and forget this ever happened? Or are you going to make things complicated? I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, a loud voice interrupted us. Ryan. We both turned to see a man in a black suit striding toward us. His expression was a mix of relief and urgency. You weren't supposed to take this long, the man said, his eyes darting to me. Who's she? Ryan's jaw tightened. None of your business, Greg. It becomes my business when you start breaking protocol, Greg snapped. Do you realize how dangerous this is? I can handle it, Ryan said sharply. Back off. Greg didn't look convinced. You've already drawn enough attention. We need to move. Now. What's going on? I asked, my pulse quickening. Who is this guy? And what protocol? Stay out of it, Greg said, his tone dismissive. Ryan, we don't have time for this. I bristled at his tone. Excuse me? You don't get to tell me what to do. Greg's eyes narrowed. Ryan, get rid of her. Now. Stop, Ryan said, his voice cold. She's not going anywhere. Greg stared at him in disbelief. Are you out of your mind? You can't trust her. Ryan's expression hardened. She's not the problem here. Now either you back off, or I walk. Greg cursed under his breath, glaring at me like I was a ticking time bomb. Fine, he said finally. But don't say I didn't warn you. As Greg stormed off, Ryan turned to me, his expression unreadable. Looks like you're in this now, he said. Great, I said, sarcasm dripping from my voice. Just what I needed, a front row seat to your shady dealings. You wanted answers, he reminded me. Now you're going to get them. But it's not going to be pretty. Try me, I said, crossing my arms. For the first time, a faint smile flickered across his lips. You're stubborn, I'll give you that. And you're infuriating, I shot back. His smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Come on, if you're sticking around, you might as well know what you've gotten yourself into. Ryan led me to his car, a sleek black SUV that looked as expensive as it was untraceable. The kind of car that screamed wealth but not personality. As the door shut behind me, I couldn't help but feel like I'd stepped into something far bigger than I could comprehend. Once we were on the road, I turned to him. All right, no more vague answers. What's the deal with the money? And who's Greg? Is he your babysitter or something? Ryan chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Greg works for me, technically, but he's more of a handler. His job is to keep me alive and out of trouble. Alive? I repeated, my stomach nodding. You're acting like you're in some spy movie. Not quite, he said, his tone dark. But close enough. He glanced at me, gauging my reaction, then sighed as if making a decision. I work in private equity. High risk, high reward. Sometimes the stakes are more than just financial. Some of the people I deal with, let's just say they don't play by the rules. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. So what? You're a millionaire with enemies. More like a billionaire, he corrected, almost absent-mindedly, as if the distinction didn't matter. My jaw dropped. You're joking? He smirked. Not even a little? The air in the car felt heavier as the weight of his words settled over me. And the cash? It's leverage, he said simply. In my world, trust is a currency, and sometimes cash is the only thing people understand. I shook my head, my mind spinning. This is insane. Why are you even telling me this? You don't know me. For all you know, I could be some journalist looking for a scoop. I've already checked you out, he said, his tone matter of fact. I blinked. Excuse me? He tapped his phone, showing me a brief flash of what looked like my social media profiles. The moment you grabbed my bag, Greg ran a background check. You're clean. Just an ordinary woman who got caught up in the wrong moment. Or the right one, I muttered, my cheeks heating. Still, you're awfully trusting for someone who claims to have enemies. I don't trust easily, he said, his voice softening. But something tells me you're not the type to stab me in the back. His words hung in the air, laced with a vulnerability I hadn't expected. Before I could respond, he pulled into a private driveway, the gates sliding open to reveal a sprawling modern mansion that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Home sweet home, he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. The house was even more impressive inside, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist design, and breathtaking views of the city skyline. But it wasn't the luxury that caught my attention, it was the security. Cameras were everywhere, and the place felt more like a fortress than a home. Paranoid much? I asked as I followed him inside. You'd be too if you lived my life, he said, setting the suitcase down on a sleek glass table. This is where I feel safe. For now. I frowned. For now? You're seriously making it sound like you're constantly being hunted. He didn't respond immediately, instead pouring 2 glasses of whiskey from a decanter. He handed one to me, his gaze steady. In my world, trust is rare. People smile to your face while plotting to take everything from you. I've learned to always watch my back. I took the glass, the amber liquid trembling slightly as my hands shook. And yet, you're letting me into your home. Why? Because, he said, taking a sip of his drink, you saw too much at the airport. If I let you walk away without an explanation, you'd start asking questions. And questions lead to trouble. My stomach twisted. So, what now? Are you planning to keep me here? Not exactly, he said, his lips twitching in a faint smile. But you're not leaving until I'm sure you're not a threat. Over the next few hours, Ryan filled me in on the basics of his life, at least the parts he was willing to share. He told me about the high-stakes deals, the rivalries, and the betrayals that had shaped him into the man he was. But he was careful not to give away too much, always keeping a layer of mystery between us. You're incredibly guarded, I said at one point, frustrated by his evasiveness. And you're incredibly persistent, he shot back, his tone amused. Maybe that's why I haven't thrown you out yet. I rolled my eyes, but there was a flicker of warmth in his gaze that made my heart skip a beat. Against my better judgment, I was starting to like him, or at least the parts of him he allowed me to see. But just as I was beginning to let my guard down, Greg reappeared, his expression grim. We've got a problem, he said, his eyes flicking to me. A big one. What is it? Ryan asked, his tone sharp. Greg hesitated, glancing at me again. We've been compromised. Someone knows about the money. Ryan's expression darkened instantly. Oh. Greg's jaw tightened. We don't know yet. But the call started coming in as soon as you left the airport. Someone's been watching. My stomach flipped. Watching? You mean someone's following him? Greg ignored me, addressing Ryan. This is why I said no deviations. Taking risks like this. Enough, Ryan snapped. Focus on the solution. What do we know? Greg hesitated, glancing at me again, clearly uncomfortable with my presence. Ryan noticed and cut him off. Say it. She's not going anywhere. With a reluctant nod, Greg continued. The trail leads back to one of your competitors. They're making a move, and it's going to get messy. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his composure unraveling just slightly. How long do we have? Not long. They've already put feelers out. If we're not careful, this escalates fast. Escalates into what? I asked, unable to stay silent. Into people getting hurt, Ryan said bluntly. Including you? The weight of his words settled over me like a storm cloud. So what do? We make a move before they do, Ryan said, standing and pacing. His mind was clearly racing, calculating every angle. Greg folded his arms. We need to lock this down. No more distractions. No more risks. Ryan shot him a look. And you think sitting here and waiting is the answer? Greg's jaw worked, but he didn't respond. Ryan turned to me. You want to stick around? Fine. But things are about to get dangerous. You need to decide now. I hesitated, the enormity of the situation crashing down on me. I could leave, walk away from all of this, and pretend I'd never met Ryan. But something about him, his intensity, his vulnerability, made it impossible to turn my back. I'm staying, I said, my voice steady. You're not getting rid of me that easily. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind. Ryan's mansion transformed into a command center, with Greg coordinating security and Ryan making a series of cryptic phone calls. I tried to stay out of the way, but every so often, I caught snippets of conversation that sent shivers down my spine. They've already bought off 2 of our suppliers, Ryan said at one point, his voice low and tense. If we don't shut this down now, we're done. By the time the first move came, I was barely prepared. A dark SUV pulled up outside the mansion, its windows tinted. Ryan's team was on high alert, their earpieces buzzing with updates. Stay inside, Ryan ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. What's happening? I asked, my heart pounding. Just stay here, he said, grabbing a sleek black case and heading for the door. I watched from the window as Ryan confronted the men who stepped out of the SUV. Their conversation was heated, their body language tense. My stomach twisted as one of the men reached for something inside his jacket. But before he could make a move, Ryan's team swarmed, disarming him and taking control. The entire exchange was over in seconds, but the adrenaline left me shaken. Back inside, Ryan was livid. They're testing us, he said, pacing the room. They want to see how far they can push. And you just gave them an answer, Greg said. Now they know we're ready. Ryan's eyes met mine, and I saw something there I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not for himself, but for everyone caught in the crossfire. We're not safe here, he said quietly. We need to move. Move? Where? I asked, my voice rising. Somewhere they can't find us, he said, grabbing his suitcase and heading for the door. Greg, get the car. The drive was silent, the tension in the air so thick it was almost suffocating. Ryan navigated the city like he knew it better than anyone else, taking back roads and avoiding cameras. By the time we reached our destination, a nondescript safe house on the edge of town, I was on edge. Inside, the atmosphere was stark and utilitarian. No luxury, no comfort, just the bare essentials for survival. Ryan didn't seem fazed, but I felt the weight of the situation more acutely than ever. What now? I asked as he set the suitcase down. Now, he said, his voice cold, we fight back. Ryan's plan was methodical and ruthless. Over the next few days, he worked tirelessly to dismantle the network of people who had come after him. He cut off their supply chains, exposed their weaknesses, and leveraged every connection he had to turn the tide in his favor. I watched in awe and growing concern as he navigated the murky waters of his world with precision. But the closer we got to dismantling the threat, the more dangerous things became. One night, as we sat in the dimly lit safe house, Ryan turned to me. You're braver than I gave you credit for. I blinked, surprised. Why? Because you're still here, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Most people would have run by now. I shrugged, though my heart raced at his words. Maybe I'm just stubborn. Or maybe, he said, his gaze locking onto mine, You're exactly the kind of person I've been waiting for." The days that followed were a blur of strategy meetings, late-night phone calls, and calculated risks. Ryan's demeanor was calm but steely, his focus razor-sharp as he worked to outmaneuver his enemies. Meanwhile, I found myself pulled deeper into his world, a world of power plays, high stakes, and the constant threat of betrayal. One evening, as Ryan and I sat across from each other in the safe house, the tension between us reached a breaking point. "Why are you still here?" he asked suddenly, his piercing gray eyes locking onto mine. "You've seen how dangerous this is. You've seen what I'm up against." I hesitated, caught off guard by the question. I guess I feel like I'd regret walking away. Like if I did, I'd always wonder what happened. And maybe I care more than I should. His expression softened, and for a moment, the guarded walls he kept around himself seemed to lower. "No one's ever stuck around before. Not like this." "Well, there's a first time for everything," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The next morning, the uneasy calm was shattered when Greg burst into the room, his face pale. "They're making their move," he announced, his voice tight. "We've got intel they're coming tonight." Ryan didn't flinch, but the muscles in his jaw tightened. "How reliable is the source?" "Very," Greg said. "We've got hours at best." I felt a chill run down my spine. What does that mean? Are we in danger? Ryan stood, his presence commanding. "It means we don't wait for them to come to us. We take the fight to them." Greg frowned. "That's a big risk." "So is sitting here and hoping for the best," Ryan shot back. "Get the team ready." The plan was deceptively simple. Ryan's team would intercept their rivals before they could reach the safe house, cutting them off at a remote location. It was risky, but it was the only way to ensure we stayed one step ahead. "You're staying here," Ryan said to me as he geared up, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Like hell I am," I said, crossing my arms. "I'm not just going to sit here while you go off and risk your life." "This isn't a debate," he said, his voice firm. "I need to know you're safe. And what if something goes wrong?" I countered. "What if you don't come back?" He paused, his gaze softening. "Then I'll make sure you never have to worry about that." Before I could argue further, he leaned in, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that was as brief as it was intense. It left me breathless and more determined than ever to see him through this. The ambush went down in an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. Ryan's team moved like shadows, their movements precise and calculated. I watched the live feed from the safe house, my heart pounding with every second that passed. "They're moving in," Greg said, his voice tight as he monitored the situation. On the screen, Ryan's team clashed with the rival group. The sounds of gunfire and shouted commands filled the room, each moment more harrowing than the last. Ryan was in the thick of it, his leadership unshakable even in the chaos. Then, just as it seemed like they had the upper hand, everything went wrong. The rival group had reinforcements waiting in the wings. They swarmed the area, turning the tide of the battle in an instant. Ryan's team was outnumbered and outgunned, and the safe house filled with the sounds of frantic radio chatter. "We've got to pull them out," Greg said, his voice urgent. "They won't last much longer." "No," Ryan's voice came through the radio, steady despite the chaos around him. "We finished this." Ryan's decision to press forward was bold, but it came at a cost. His team suffered heavy losses, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought he wouldn't make it out alive. But then, in a move that was as daring as it was reckless, Ryan turned the tide. He outmaneuvered the rival group, using the chaos to his advantage and forcing them into retreat. By the time the dust settled, the battle was won, but the victory felt hollow. When Ryan returned to the safe house, he was bruised and battered but alive. Relief flooded through me as I ran to him, wrapping my arms around him without a second thought. "You're an idiot," I said, my voice breaking. "But I'm glad you're okay." He chuckled, wincing slightly. "I'll take that as a compliment." The relief of seeing Ryan alive was short-lived. As he sat on the edge of a chair, Greg hovered over him, checking a deep cut along his arm. The safe house felt eerily silent despite the chaos we had just witnessed. "We may have forced them to retreat, but this isn't over," Greg said grimly. "They'll regroup, and next time, they'll come harder." Ryan gritted his teeth as Greg wrapped his wound. "Let them try. They've already shown their hand." We know who's pulling the strings now. Greg glanced at me, his expression tight. And what's the plan for her? She's a liability. She's staying, Ryan said without hesitation, his tone leaving no room for argument. If they know about her, leaving her alone would be a death sentence. I swallowed hard, realizing the weight of his words. Wait, what do you mean? They know about me? Greg's silence spoke volumes. Ryan looked at me, his jaw tightening. You've been in their sights since the airport. They're using you to get to me. Panic surged through me, but Ryan reached for my hand, his touch grounding me. I won't let anything happen to you. I promise. Ryan wasted no time devising a new plan. If his rivals wanted to play dirty, he was prepared to meet them head-on. The next step was identifying the key players behind the attack. They've got someone feeding them intel, Ryan explained as we gathered around the table. We need to find them all. Greg frowned. That's easier said than done. They've been careful to cover their tracks. Not careful enough, Ryan said, pulling out a laptop. I've been tracking their digital activity. There's a pattern, subtle, but it's there. If we follow it, we can trace it back to the source. As Ryan worked, I couldn't help but admire his focus. Despite the chaos and danger, he never wavered. It was clear that he thrived in high-pressure situations, but I wondered what it had cost him over the years. You don't have to do this alone, I said quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. He glanced at me, a faint smile softening his features. I'm not alone. Not anymore. The lead Ryan uncovered pointed to a high-profile event in the city, a charity gala that one of his rivals was hosting. It was the perfect opportunity to gather intel and confront the mole. We're going in undercover, Ryan announced. They won't expect us to show up. Greg looked skeptical. You're risking everything for this. If they recognize you. They won't, Ryan interrupted. And if they do, it'll be too late. He turned to me. You're coming with me? Me? I asked, startled. Why? Because they'll be watching for me, not you, he said. You'll be my cover. I hesitated, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. But one look at Ryan's determined expression was enough to convince me. Okay, let's do it. The gala was a spectacle of wealth and opulence. Glittering chandeliers, flowing champagne, and a sea of designer gowns filled the grand ballroom. Ryan and I entered through a side entrance, blending in with the crowd. You look stunning, he whispered, his gaze lingering on me. I blushed, my heart racing. Focus, Ryan. We're here for a reason. He smirked, just stating the obvious. As we moved through the crowd, Ryan's demeanor shifted. He was no longer the guarded man I had come to know. He was charming, confident, and completely at ease. It was like watching a master actor slip into character. There, he said under his breath, nodding toward a man in a sharp suit standing near the bar. That's our target. I followed his gaze, my stomach nodding. The man exuded power, his every move calculated. Ryan handed me a tiny earpiece. Stay close, but don't draw attention. We need to listen in. As Ryan engaged the man in conversation, I drifted nearby, pretending to admire the artwork on the walls. Through the earpiece, I could hear every word of their exchange. I didn't expect to see you here, the man said, his tone laced with suspicion. Thought I'd make an appearance, Ryan replied smoothly. It's a lovely event. Cut the pleasantries, the man snapped. What do you want? Ryan's voice hardened. To end this. You've been coming after me for months. It stops now. The man laughed, a cold, chilling sound. You think you can just waltz in here and make demands? You're in over your head, Ryan. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Ryan said, his tone icy. You've underestimated me before. Don't make the same mistake twice. The conversation escalated quickly. When Ryan dropped a piece of intel that exposed the man's involvement in illegal dealings, the man's composure cracked. You've made a big mistake, he hissed, his eyes narrowing. Funny, Ryan said. I was about to say the same to you. Before the man could react, Ryan signaled to me. Time to go. We slipped out of the gala as chaos erupted behind us. The man's network had been exposed, and Ryan's calculated risk had paid off. But the danger was far from over. Back at the safe house, Ryan's team celebrated their victory, but the tension lingered. Ryan knew his enemies wouldn't give up easily. They'll regroup, he said, but next time, we'll be ready. I looked at him, my chest tight with a mix of fear and admiration. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, taking my hand, "we make sure they never come after us again." The final confrontation came a week later. Ryan and his team launched a decisive strike against their rivals, dismantling their operation for good. It was a victory hard won, but it brought a sense of closure that had been missing for too long. As the dust settled, Ryan turned to me, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. "You've been through hell with me. You didn't have to stay, but you did." I smiled, tears welling in my eyes. "I told you I don't walk away from things that matter." "You matter," he said, pulling me into his arms. "More than anything." As we stood together, the world finally felt like it was ours to shape. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the future seemed bright.